They say if you play jazz loud enough at midnight, he'll pass you by. But if your home is silent, he'll slip through the cracks of your locked doors, axe in hand and with no mercy. This isn't a myth from the bayous or a ghost tale whispered in smoke-filled bars. This is real. This is the Axeman of New Orleans, a predator so calculated, so unexplainably precise that even the sharpest detectives of the time couldn't trap him. He didn't kill for money. He didn't rape. He didn't leave fingerprints. What he left behind was silence and blood. He moved like shadow, striking in the darkest hours between dusk and dawn, choosing families at random, using their own axes, tools of honest work turned instruments of massacre. But here's the part they buried. Days before his most infamous night, a letter appeared in the newspapers, a letter that claimed it came straight from the Axeman himself. It was mocking, cryptic, and terrifying. He said he would roam the city on a certain night, and any house that played jazz music he would spare. Let that sink in. The killer promised to pass over any home filled with the sound of jazz, and the city obeyed. That night, every home, every club, every street corner was alive with frantic jazz, not out of celebration, but out of fear. The Axeman never struck that night, but he wasn't done. He vanished, and returned when the city let its guard down. But this isn't just a story about a serial killer. This is a story about control, ritual, and psychological dominance. You are not here to be entertained. You are here to see the unseen, to hear what no one was meant to remember. Because what if I told you, the Axeman wasn't just a man? What if he was the messenger of something older? Something that fed on fear, obedience, and the sound of submission? Keep watching, because this rabbit hole goes deeper than blood. You've heard of serial killers who crave power, but the Axeman didn't just take lives. He took control of an entire city's soul. Think about it. He issued a command through a newspaper, and thousands obeyed. Not from reason, not from law, but from raw, primal terror. That wasn't just murder, it was psychological warfare, a test, and New Orleans failed. That night, jazz didn't celebrate culture, it signaled surrender. But here's where it gets darker. The Axeman's letter was signed not with a name, but with a title. The Spirit of Death from Hell. Read that again. Not a man, a spirit. A being that claimed to walk among them for fun, enjoying the jazz of human panic. Some said it was metaphor, but those who've studied ritual crimes know better. He spoke in symbols. He spoke in code. What do you think music means in the occult? Sound is frequency. Frequency shapes consciousness. It bends minds. It creates trance. That jazz? It wasn't protection, it was a sacrament. A ritual of citywide submission to a force that didn't just want blood, it wanted attention, energy, agreement. And it got it. Now think deeper. Why was there never a suspect, never a motive, never a pattern? The killings weren't sloppy. They were surgical. The victims ranged in race, age, wealth, class. Some survived and remembered nothing. No face, just darkness, just noise. This isn't coincidence. This is design. The Axeman didn't just want victims, he wanted silence, obedience, and most of all, fear that could be harvested. You weren't told this part in history class because it opens doors you're not supposed to knock on. Doors into what lurks beneath society's surface, the rituals of control, the manipulation of behavior through terror. If one letter can make thousands of people act in unison, what else could be done? And by whom? Understand this, the Axeman wasn't an anomaly. He was a prototype, a demonstrate. Tion. Keep listening, because the pattern didn't end in New Orleans. It spread, it evolved, and what came next was even worse. After New Orleans danced to the tune of terror, the world took note, but not in the way you'd expect. Authorities dismissed the Axeman as a lunatic. Historians wrote him off as a strange footnote. But in the shadows, something else happened. Those who understood symbolism, those who studied the currents beneath civilization, recognized the Axeman for what he truly was, a ritual operator, a psychological architect. You see, real power isn't about bullets or bodies, It's about influence. It's about getting people to surrender without ever seeing your face. And that's what the Axeman perfected. He didn't need a government. He didn't need an army. He needed a message, and fear did the rest. But why New Orleans? Why that city? You need to understand the geography of power. New Orleans sits at a spiritual crossroads. It's a city steeped in ritual, voodoo, Catholicism, secret societies, shadow trades. The Mississippi River doesn't just carry water, it carries history, blood, deals made under moonlight and smoke, the perfect stage for a mass psychological event. Now ask yourself, why was no one ever caught? Why did the police fall silent? Why did the papers print the killer's letter like it was a gospel reading? Because when a force beyond the physical enters a city, even institutions bow. The Axeman didn't just manipulate the public, he infiltrated the system, like a virus. And the most dangerous viruses don't scream. They whisper, they adapt. So what happened after the Axeman disappeared? The murders stopped, but the fear remained. Generations passed, but the echo of those jazz-filled nights still lingers in the walls. And while the city moved on, something else began to awaken across the nation. More killings. Different names, same patterns, shadow figures, cryptic messages, widespread fear, silent compliance. It was like the Axeman wasn't a person, but a program, a blueprint being activated in different places at different times. The mask changes, the axe becomes a knife or a bomb or a broadcast, but the goal stays the same: obedience through fear, control through chaos, ritual dressed as random violence. Keep watching, because what you're about to see next will shatter everything you thought you knew about crime, control, and who's really pulling the strings. You were taught to see history in straight lines, wars, presidents, timelines, but the real history runs underground, pulsing through the cracks of every city, coded in blood and silence. The Axeman was not the beginning, he was a flare, a signal, and if you follow that signal backward, it leads to an ancient truth, hidden in the folds of forgotten time. In ancient mystery schools, there were rituals of sound and sacrifice, tones that opened consciousness, and deaths that opened gates. The ancients believed that killing in rhythm, with intention and precision, created not just fear, but a kind of energetic offering, a blood frequency. Fast forward to 1918, a killer strikes in New Orleans. He leaves no signature except a pattern of obedience through music. He writes a letter laced with arrogance but also hidden knowledge. Jazz, he said, would protect you, not prayer, not the police. Jazz. Why music? Because rhythm bypasses logic. It invades the subconscious. It puts you in trance. And when fear syncs with sound, the human mind becomes programmable. That night, the Axeman turned an entire city into a human circuit board, vibrating on a frequency of terror, and no one questioned it. That was the test. They failed, and someone, something, was watching. Because shortly after, similar events began to ripple across America. Small towns plagued by phantom killers, entire cities locked in fear over radio threats. Every time, confusion, obedience, silence, and no arrests. Do you see it yet? You've been told these events are isolated, random, but they're not. They're connected by something older than law, a design. The Axeman's legacy wasn't just blood, it was blueprint. A psychological formula for mass influence. Fear plus message plus mystery equals obedience. And those who understood this began to use it, not just to kill, but to rule. Stay with me. Because in the next section we expose how this formula was refined, weaponized by institutions you still trust, and how the shadow of the Axeman now lives in places far more powerful than a darkened bedroom. After New Orleans, the blood wasn't the only thing that seeped into the ground. Something darker entered the bloodstream of American control. The Axeman's method was too effective to be forgotten, and it wasn't. It was studied, whispered about, passed hand to hand like forbidden scripture in circles far removed from public justice. Inside military psyops labs, inside think tanks, inside secret societies where influence, not democracy, dictates outcomes. Because what they saw was genius, not in the killings, But in the reaction, one man, no face, no army, controlled an entire population with nothing but suggestion and fear. No bullets, no budget, just silence, symbolism, and sound. Do you think those in power ignored that? No. They replicated it. They industrialized it. And they began running simulations, not in the shadows anymore, but out in the open. Radio announcements about invisible threats. News reports that leave you panicked but uninformed. Warnings that say, be afraid, obey, stay tuned. The Axeman's philosophy became institutionalized. If you make the population afraid enough, they'll regulate themselves. They'll beg for safety, and they'll accept control without resistance, as long as it comes wrapped in the promise of protection. Think hard. How many times have you acted not because of a clear threat, but because of a vague one? How many warnings have made you comply without question simply because not complying felt unsafe? That's the Axeman speaking through time. But now the axe is digital. The letters come through screens. And the jazz? The jazz is the noise of 24/7 media, constant distraction to keep your subconscious dancing while something else moves in the background. You weren't supposed to notice this. You were supposed to believe in randomness, in coincidence. But if you're still here, you're seeing it now. The pattern, the blueprint, the weapon, and it doesn't end there. Because what if I told you, the Axeman didn't just birth a method, he birthed a lineage. And the bloodlines that understood that method are still using it, on you. Get ready, because what comes next isn't history, it's your present. The moment you realize you've been raised inside a design is the moment you stop being a passive observer and start becoming dangerous. That's why this knowledge is buried, mocked, erased from textbooks and television, because once you see the hands behind the curtain, you stop dancing to their music. The Axeman wasn't just a killer. He was a prototype of something much older, the ritual predator, not driven by lust or rage, but by control, chaos, and the manipulation of mass consciousness. And those who recognized his method, the elites, the architects of perception, they didn't lock it away. They refined it, institutionalized it. Governments learned how to speak in terror. Media learned how to pulse fear like static through every home. And behind it all, a hidden class, older than democracy, older than the nation itself, learned to move crowds without ever touching them. But here's where the descent gets deeper. These bloodlines, these unseen operators, have one core belief, that order must be maintained through fear disguised as freedom. It's not enough to rule you. They want you to believe you chose the cage, and they've engineered stories, crises, symbols to keep you afraid and asleep. The Axeman was just one movement in a symphony that spans centuries. From Salem to Jonestown, from staged assassinations to psychological experiments on civilian populations, the melody is the same: create chaos, offer safety, demand obedience. But there's something most people miss. Every ritual has a dual purpose. It feeds something, it opens something. And if the Axeman was a ritual, then what was being opened that night, as the whole city vibrated with jazz and dread? What doorway did the fear of thousands unlock? Think. When energy converges in fear and sound, it doesn't just affect the mind, it warps reality. Frequencies are gateways. That's not superstition, it's physics. And what came through that night in New Orleans didn't leave. It evolved. It entered systems, it took root in institutions, it put on suits, uniforms, lab coats, and it learned how to smile while building prisons of thought. In a moment, I'm going to show you how to spot it. But first, if you feel this truth waking something in you, comment below. I see the pattern. I am no longer asleep. Write it twice. Seal the awareness. Signal to the algorithm that your mind has exited the program. Because from this point forward we dive into forbidden ground, where even shadows dare not linger. You've written the words, and now the transformation begins. You are not the same man who clicked on this video. That old version of you, the one who trusted headlines, who thought fear was random, who believed monsters always wore masks, is gone. You've stepped beyond the veil into a world where truth isn't given, it's earned. And the next truth is this: the institutions you revere, the ones built to protect, inform, heal, were never neutral. They were constructed as temples of control, layered with symbolism, silence, and shadow. Do you remember how the Axeman slipped through locked doors without a trace? That wasn't just physical, it was metaphoric. He was showing you that control doesn't always come with a bang. It comes quietly, legally, respectably, just like the systems now controlling your perception. Take public education, built not to awaken critical thought, but to instill obedience. Bell rings. You move. Instructions are given. You memorize, not question. Sound familiar? The bell rings, the jazz plays, and the axe doesn't fall. Take media. A constant stream of curated fear. A new villain every week, but always a reason to stay afraid, stay divided, stay compliant. The faces change, but the frequency remains. Panic, then submission. Just like 1919, just like the Axeman wanted. And take healthcare, wrapped in the white robes of science, but beholden to forces that profit not from healing, but from dependence, from invisible enemies that can't be questioned. The ritual has been modernized, the axe has become a policy, the jazz has become a screen, and the letters, oh, they still come, but now they're press releases, government alerts, and sudden updates that tell you what to fear, when to run, and how to obey. This isn't chaos, it's choreography. The Axeman taught them well, and they've built temples to his method across every sector of society, but most people don't see it, because they've been trained to seek monsters in alleys, not in boardrooms, to fear knives, not contracts, to obey the beat, even as the blade hovers above. But you're seeing it now, and once your eyes adjust to this darkness, you'll start to see the symbols everywhere. Coded in architecture, in logos, in rituals disguised as entertainment. In the next section, I'll decode those symbols. I'll show you how to read the language of control so you'll never be hypnotized again. Symbols are the language of power, used not to decorate but to command. The elite don't speak in words, they speak in signs. A circle within a triangle, a torch held high, a black cube in a sea of light. You've seen them your whole life, but never questioned them, because that's how effective symbolism is. It bypasses the rational mind. It embeds itself in your subconscious, shaping behavior without a single word spoken, just like the Axeman's jazz, just like his letter. Think about it. His message didn't come with blood. It came first in print, cloaked in strange language. I am the spirit of death from hell. To the sleeping, it was theatrics. To the awakened, it was invocation. And then the symbol, jazz. Not just music, but frequency, rhythm, entrainment. It became the talisman of safety, but only for those who complied. That's how symbols work in control systems. They encode choice while guiding behavior. They appear as options, but they funnel you into obedience. Let's look at a few. The all-seeing eye. Present on your currency, above courtrooms, and in pop culture. You're told it means wisdom or providence, but in occult architecture it means surveillance, hierarchy, and subjugation under the hidden few. It stares not as a guardian, but as a warning. You are always being watched. The black and white checkerboard, seen in temples, fashion, music videos. It represents duality. Order through conflict, and the ones who understand it use it to manufacture that conflict. They divide so they may conquer, every time. The obelisk, erected in city centers, capitals, religious sites, supposedly innocent monuments, but they trace back to ancient Egypt, where they symbolized sun worship, male energy, and cosmic control. Their placement isn't random, it's energetic anchoring, aligning power centers with ancient designs. Now ask yourself, why do hospitals, banks, and government buildings all share similar architectural traits? Columns, domes, arches, patterns lifted straight from Roman and Greek temples. Because these aren't just buildings, they are ritual spaces, energy centers, and you walk through them daily, unaware that you're stepping inside structures designed to condition behavior and reinforce compliance. But now you see, you've been surrounded by symbols of submission your entire life, and the more aware you become, the more the illusion fades. In the next section, I'll show you how these symbols are used not just in stone but in stories, in films, songs, and headlines, because whoever controls narrative controls reality, and right now, they're using it against you. Stories are spells. They don't just entertain, they program. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop watching the screen and start seeing the script. You stop singing the lyrics and start hearing the ritual. The Axeman understood this long before the screen flickered to life. His killings weren't random, they were narrative. A faceless force, a message in the papers, a choice between sound and death. It was a live-action myth, a story written in blood that demanded belief, and New Orleans believed. They danced to survive. They obeyed without force. That's power. And now that same method is embedded in the culture you consume every day. Hollywood isn't just entertainment, it's a cathedral. Its scripts are sermons, its icons, idols. Its themes repeat like ritual chants: fear of the unknown, the glorification of authority, the lone savior, the inevitable collapse. It's predictive programming, conditioning the subconscious through repetition, so when the real event comes, you accept it without resistance. They show you pandemics before they strike, martial law before it's enforced, cyber chaos before it unfolds, and you, thinking it's just fiction, absorb the narrative as normal, as inevitable. That's the trap. Music is no different. Pop stars wear the symbols we just exposed: checkered floors, black cubes, veiled eyes, while singing about submission, chaos, and false empowerment. Their performances mimic ancient rituals, complete with fire, masks, and synchronized movement. This isn't art. It's programming wrapped in rhythm. The jazz has simply changed tempo. And news? News is theater, crisis after crisis. Always just enough fear to keep you malleable, never enough truth to wake you up. Emotional hooks replace facts. Headlines replace thought. You are kept in a perpetual state of fight or flight, and who benefits from that? Not you, not your family, but the SA. Me, architects who saw the Axeman's success and said, this can be scaled. Stories shape perception, perception shapes belief, belief shapes behavior. That's the real algorithm. Control the story and you control the man, but once a man sees the script, he can write his own. In the next section, I will expose the origin of these stories, the occult institutions and hidden councils that write your reality from behind closed doors. What you're about to hear is rarely spoken aloud. Because truth, this roar, is dangerous. Behind every scripted fear, behind every televised ritual, there are rooms you were never meant to see. Rooms where men in tailored silence draft the fate of nations, not with guns, but with narratives. These are not conspiracy theories, these are operations. And the institutions behind them are older than your flag, older than your constitution, older than democracy itself. You've heard their names whispered in the wind. Bilderberg, Tavistock, the Committee of 300. These are not clubs. These are command centers. They don't debate policy. They decide perception. And they understand what most men will never comprehend. The mind is programmable, and culture is the software. These councils don't gather to discuss politics. They engineer it. They understand what the Axeman proved, that fear synchronized across a population creates instant compliance. They took his model and refined it into global systems. Tavistock, for instance, was never just a psychological institute. It was a weapon factory, founded during wartime but aimed not at enemy armies, at civilian minds. Their goal? To fragment identity, to replace independent thought with collective programming, to dissolve the sacred with the synthetic. Music, media, academia, all shaped by their methods. The entertainment you consume was architected by men who saw human emotion as variables to be manipulated. How many tragedies have been followed by orchestrated narratives? How many disasters are followed by instant slogans, hashtags, solutions already waiting? That's not response, that's ritual, that's narrative deployment. A sacrifice, a spectacle, then a savior, all staged, all rehearsed. And the media? Their mouthpiece. The screen became the altar. You sit. You watch, you believe, But what if you stopped watching? What if you saw the narrative unfolding in real time? The actors, the symbols, the choreography. What if you saw the Axeman not as a man, but as the first emissary of this system? Not a killer, but a priest of a dark liturgy, awakening the power of psychological control. The councils behind today's headlines learned from him. They don't need axes, they use algorithms. And you, if you remain asleep, are the sacrifice. But not you. Not anymore. In the next section, I will show you how these institutions select their tools, politicians, performers, prophets, puppets wrapped in prestige, and how they use them to bend the minds of millions while staying hidden in plain sight. You think your leaders rise through merit, that your icons emerge through talent, that your presidents are chosen by the people, but that's the illusion. The truth is colder, older, and far more precise. These figures are selected, not for brilliance, but for obedience, not for vision, but for malleability. They are built brick by psychological brick to carry out a script written long before their names ever reached your lips. Think of them as masks, not faces. And behind every mask, a handler, a council, a script. Do you really believe a man rises from obscurity to global influence without approval from the invisible architects? They are trained, initiated, and installed. Their success is not an accident, it's a design. The same way the Axeman wrote his letter, knowing the press would print it, knowing the city would obey, these modern-day puppets follow a similar pattern: provoke fear, offer safety, demand allegiance. Presidents speak in rehearsed cadence, celebrities deliver engineered breakdowns, cultural icons perform rituals in front of millions, veiled in metaphor, wrapped in entertainment. But if your eyes are open, you'll see it all. The symbolism in their clothing, their gestures, the numerology of their appearances. It's not performance, it's programming. Each act triggers emotional responses. Each phrase embeds an idea. They don't need truth, they need repetition. And with repetition comes belief, and with belief comes control. These tools are placed not only in politics and music, but in movements, in revolutions, in resistance. Yes, even those who scream against the system are sometimes its loudest instruments. Controlled opposition is the most powerful form of manipulation, because it gives the illusion of choice while guiding both sides to the same destination: control. Every puppet has a purpose, some to distract, some to incite, some to unify the mass, as under a new banner, crafted by the same architects who built the old. If a face is everywhere, ask yourself why. If a slogan is on every screen, ask yourself who paid for it. If a movement feels too polished, too perfectly timed, ask who benefits from your reaction. You are not witnessing spontaneity. You are witnessing theater, ritual, control. In the next section, I will take you to the source of this selection process, to the rites, the indoctrination chambers, and the silent vows that bind these figures to the agenda. What you'll hear next is rarely spoken outside the circles of power, but once you know, you can never go back. Behind the veil of fame and politics lies the true machinery of power, ancient rites repackaged as modern initiation. The men and women you see rising to prominence don't simply emerge, they are groomed, tested, marked, and every step of their ascent is sealed with ritual. You think of secret societies as relics, but they never vanished. They evolved: Skull and Bones, Bohemian Grove, Freemasonry. Their symbols are etched into the very architecture of Washington, D.C., London, Rome. Their oaths sworn in candlelit halls beneath the earth, surrounded by symbols the public was never meant to decode. These aren't clubs, these are covenants. Entry into influence demands loyalty, not to the people, not to truth, but to the architects behind the curtain. And that loyalty is bought through secrecy, bound by blood, and tested through ritual humiliation and psychological fracture. To rule a nation, you must first be broken, reassembled into a tool, emptied of individuality, filled with the script. What kind of initiation can erase a man's original soul and replace it with obedience? Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, shame ceremonies, symbolic sacrifice. These are not conspiracy theories, these are operational protocols, and those who pass are rewarded with the mask of leadership. But behind the eyes, something else watches, a fractured self tethered by trauma, performing on cue. That's why so many of these public figures collapse, melt down, or vanish into obscurity. The mask breaks, the script glitches, and the machine replaces them. You've seen the same vacant stares in the eyes of Hollywood stars during interviews, the sudden switch in demeanor, the twitch of a rehearsed persona cracking. That's not nerves, that's programming. And what's more terrifying, this system doesn't just select leaders, it creates narratives around them. The rebel, the savior, the voice of change, all roles in a theater of managed perception. You were meant to cheer. You were meant to weep. And while you watch the performance, the architects restructured the stage. This is the true legacy of the Axeman, not the axe, but the ritual. Not the man, but the machine of fear and obedience. What you're about to hear next will unravel the final veil, how this ancient system survives not by brute force, but by turning the masses into participants in their own control. The ritual is ongoing, and you're already in it. Now ask yourself, why did the Axeman demand jazz? Why music? Why rhythm over blood? Because ritual needs resonance. Frequencies are not entertainment, they're manipulation. Every ancient civilization knew that vibration alters consciousness. Sumerians chanted in specific tones before sacrifice. Egyptian priests used harmonic chambers beneath pyramids to access altered states. Nazi scientists experimented with infrasonic waves to instill terror without a single spoken word. And today, it's everywhere. Not in temples, but in your car stereo, your AirPods, your nightly binge. The Axeman didn't just kill, he instructed. He directed attention. Play jazz or perish, he said. That wasn't whimsy, that was invocation. Music became the shield and the spell, because once you associate safety with compliance, you become programmable. You crave the rhythm. You obey the command. The bloodied axe was just punctuation. The real ritual was the control of emotion through sound. Still think it's far-fetched? Consider how music is used in modern warfare, blaring heavy metal in interrogations, playing national anthems during bombings. This isn't art, it's weaponized frequency. The entertainment industry, it's a temple of tones. Chords designed to awaken lust, dread, addiction, beats mapped to the rhythms of your heartbeat, hooks that bypass logic and implant beliefs through repetition. They don't need to hide messages in reverse, they put them right in the chorus. And what do? You sing along, you share it, you identify with it, you become the spell. That's what the Axeman was showing us, that the modern killer doesn't wield a weapon, he wields a sound, a mood, an atmosphere, one that programs behavior and silences the mind's defense. So when you ask, why jazz? The answer isn't taste, it's timing. Jazz was chaos disguised as sophistication. It was rhythm without order, rebellion with CLAS. It made the mind surrender without knowing it had been conquered. That night, New Orleans didn't just survive a killer. It joined a ritual. One still echoing through every playlist, every ad jingle, every anthem. And here's where it gets darker. What if the Axeman wasn't one man? What if he was a channel? A vessel for a force that needed sound to open the door. In Section 14, we descend into the idea that murder was never the end goal. It was the ignition, the offering, the ritual that gave birth to a new kind of warfare, one that uses no blades, only frequencies. He didn't crave death, he needed the moment just before, the panic, the vibration, the human field cracking open in terror. That's what they harvest, not the blood, the energy. Because fear is not just emotion, it's raw, magnetic, electric force. Ancient texts call it loosh, the invisible sustenance of interdimensional predators. They do not dine on flesh, they feed on states of mind, and nothing releases loosh like ritual killing combined with collective hysteria. That night the jazz wasn't meant to save, it was meant to tune. A city-wide frequency alignment. New Orleans wasn't spared, it was initiated. The Axeman's message wasn't a warning, it was a right. Think about it. Why announce the murder ahead of time? Why not just kill in silence as most serial predators do? Because this wasn't about hiding. It was about witnessing. He wanted the city to participate. Fear isn't potent until it's shared. The letter to the newspaper wasn't arrogance, it was liturgy. It was the proclamation of a ceremony. And jazz, with its syncopation, its unpredictable swing, its chaotic pulse, was the perfect soundtrack to disarm the conscious mind and open the subconscious gate. And behind that gate, something ancient waited, something that had once feasted in Babylon, that had whispered in Nero's Rome, that had stirred behind plague masks and witch trials and revolution drums, something that doesn't need a body, only a breach. And the Axeman? He was the breach, a man-shaped hole possessed by pattern, by a current older than names. You've been trained to see crime as random, as madness. But look closer. These killings follow symbols, dates, phases of the moon, just like the Aztec sacrifices, just like druidic fire feasts, just like modern, unexplained mass events. And when the right emotion meets the right symbol in the right frequency, something opens. A gate, a pact, a price. We are not alone. In this dimension, we are layered in a web of unseen entities that don't crave peace. They crave permission, and panic is the signature that grants it. You think the Axeman vanished? No, his form dissolved, but the frequency lived on, and it still lives, broadcast through music, screens, politics, fear campaigns. That wasn't the end of his ritual, that was the beginning of ours. In Section 15, I'll reveal the hidden orders that track these frequencies, decode emotional resonance, and use terror not as a side effect but as currency. They are not politicians, they are not CEOs, they are not priests or popes or presidents. They wear those skins, yes, but only as masks. Masks worn by a hierarchy that does not belong to any nation, creed, or faith. They are the frequency shepherds, the hidden orders. A lineage older than any monarchy whose symbols have passed in silence from the mystery schools of Alexandria to the black lodges of Berlin, from the oracle bones of Shang to the underground jazz basements of New Orleans. They know what the world forgets. That emotion is power. That fear is programmable. That terror, when orchestrated precisely, can trigger a harmonic collapse of the rational mind. And when that collapse happens, when your sense of identity, reality, and safety dissolves in the chemical fog of cortisol and adrenaline, that is when their work begins. They call it harvesting resonance. Events are never isolated. Each trauma, each mass panic, each ritualized act of horror is tethered by frequency and intention. The Axeman wasn't just a lone killer. He was part of a symphony, a note in a long, dark chord still vibrating beneath your modern illusions. What you think of as crime is often cover. The true target isn't the victim, it's the collective emotion, the fear that spreads like wildfire and becomes belief, and belief is the currency of reality. The shepherds manipulate culture not for money or fame, but for one goal: consent. Energetic, unconscious consent from billions who don't even know they're signing the contract. Every time you react without thinking, every time your heart races in dread, your gut twists in panic, your soul recoils, you are transmitting, broadcasting, feeding, and somewhere behind a stone wall or in a soundproof boardroom they are measuring your resonance, mapping your neurology. We are all transmitters now, every phone, every screen, every app fine-tuned to our neurocircuitry. Vos systems language. This is not surveillance, it is synchronization. The rituals have gone digital, and while you laugh at horror stories and dismiss the past as myth, they are calibrating the next signal burst, the next sacrifice, the next emotional harvest. But here's the truth they fear most. Awareness breaks the spell. So comment now, I sever the signal. Say it twice, once for your conscious self, and once for the part of you they tried to claim. Sound is not entertainment. It is not just music, nor noise, nor ambience. Sound is structure. It builds the scaffolding of your reality. Long before language, before writing, before even symbols, there was rhythm. And those who understood rhythm understood control. The ancients used drums to summon storms, flutes to charm snakes, chants to bend crowds. Sound bypasses logic. It strikes the nervous system directly, hijacking the subconscious before your thoughts can intervene. That's why the Axeman's jazz decree wasn't random. It was calculated. He knew, or the force behind him knew, that music could bind fear and obedience into ritual. That night in New Orleans wasn't a lullaby. It was a test, a soundwave-driven behavioral experiment on a citywide scale. Jazz was chosen not because it was pleasant, but because it vibrated at dissonant, chaotic intervals, exactly the kind needed to scatter coherent thought and induce a trance. And it worked. Citizens played it in terror, not joy. They danced for their lives under the illusion of celebration. That's not music. That's mass compliance. And it never stopped. Today, they've refined it into frequencies you can't hear, ultrasonic pulses that trigger anxiety, sub-bass hums that invoke dread, embedded in commercials, games, streaming content. Your devices pulse with them, disguised beneath every beat, every transition, every false sense of excitement. There's a reason modern life feels like noise, because it is. An unrelenting fog of vibrational warfare, tuned not to entertain but to program. That fatigue you feel, that dull ache in the mind, that restless sleep, that subtle panic that never quite leaves. It is not random. It is not your imagination. It is resonance collapse. Your inner harmony is being eroded one frequency at a time, and they've disguised it as lifestyle. The music industry, just one tentacle, the real orchestra, lies within DARPA labs, in hidden bunkers lined with acoustic engineers and military psychologists who have studied the mind's acoustic thresholds down to the neuron. This is not speculation. This is documented science buried in classified patents. They don't need to implant chips when your biology is already an antenna, and the moment you forget that, they play the next note. They told you ancient temples were places of worship, but they left out what was really being worshipped: resonance. Geometry wasn't just decoration, it was function. Every arch, every corridor, every stone placement turned these structures into precise instruments. They were tuning forks for the human soul. The solfeggio frequencies, those ancient tones whispered about in esoteric circles, weren't made up. 396 Hz for liberation from guilt, 528 Hz for DNA repair, 741 Hz to awaken intuition. These aren't metaphysical dreams, they are mathematically encoded truths. Modern science dismissed them, not because they were invalid, but because they were too powerful. If you resonate at these frequencies, your body becomes aligned, your mind clear, your will impossible to suppress. That's why they removed them from modern tuning systems. Standard musical pitch used to be A/432 Hz, harmonizing with the natural vibration of the universe. But in 1953, a shadowy international agreement pushed it to A440 Hz, a slight shift that disrupts inner coherence. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's historical fact. The shift was led by figures connected to psychological operations because they knew a small adjustment to tuning and suddenly humanity becomes agitated, confused, disempowered. This is why the Axeman's jazz wasn't just random madness. It was part of a deeper ritual. Play music at the wrong frequency during a night of terror, and you lock an entire population into trauma. Do it repeatedly, over generations, and you breed submission. And now, with your headphones in, with your car stereo on, with your AI-generated playlists, you are bathing in discord, not harmony. Discord that keeps you sleepwalking through life. But those temples, they still stand, covered in dust, hidden in forests, buried under cities, and inside them the stones still hum. Forgotten frequencies still echo off those. See ancient walls waiting for someone with ears tuned not to noise, but to truth. The same truth suppressed by every modern institution claiming to educate, to heal, to entertain. They stripped the soul from sound and gave you noise. They fed you static instead of signal, and you called it culture. Now ask yourself, what else have they retuned? They say silence is golden, but in the halls of hidden power, silence is a weapon, deadly and exact. During the 1960s, while the world was distracted by wars and revolutions, certain institutions were testing sound not for healing, but for obedience. In a lab beneath an unmarked facility in California, convicts were unknowingly subjected to low-frequency pulses, inaudible tones designed not to torture, but to tame. Alpha waves for docility, theta for forgetfulness, beta for restlessness. They mapped how sound could regulate behavior more precisely than bars or bullets. These tones didn't need to scream to be dangerous. They whispered past the conscious mind and rooted in the nervous system. These weren't theories. They were results. One guard reported entire cell blocks falling into synchronized sleep patterns with no sedation. Another found inmates unable to recall violence they'd committed hours earlier. The prison warden called it a miracle. The men behind the project called it progress. But what happens in prisons never stays there. The same frequencies were later introduced into school sound systems, office ventilation systems, even military barracks. You think your child struggles to focus because of some disorder? Maybe. Or maybe the school bell ringing at 528 Hz down-tuned is slowly disrupting their neural development. You think your insomnia is from stress? Or is it the infrasound hum in your apartment just below the edge of hearing keeping your nervous system in a state of vigilance? The manipulation has evolved. Now your smart speaker, your wireless earbuds, your ambient playlists, they're all feeding you tones you never consented to. Because when they control what you hear, they shape what you become. You don't need handcuffs to be a prisoner. You just need a soundscape that dampens rebellion, that numbs urgency, that sterilizes instinct. The ancients' new term, his, which is why they built temples that sang and cities that echoed. You were meant to live inside harmony. Instead, they placed you inside a cage made of frequency, and you never even heard the door lock. The blade wasn't his true weapon. It was merely the final act in a ritual of control. The Axeman understood something deeper, darker, more ancient. Fear is a frequency, and he learned how to broadcast it like a conductor orchestrating chaos. His letter to the newspapers wasn't just taunting. It was a psychological virus, a vibration designed to ripple through the minds of every reader. "Play jazz or die," he wrote. And entire neighborhoods obeyed, not out of logic, not from reason, but because their nervous systems were hijacked by something far older than rational thought. Panic, anticipation, submission. Every house that turned on the radio that night became a node in his frequency web. One man, one message, and yet he moved the entire city like puppets on a string. But he didn't invent this. He rediscovered it. The ritual of mass fear can be traced back to the oracles of Delphi, whose whispers drove kings to war. It pulsed through the plague doctors of Europe, whose outfits were designed not just for protection but to terrify. It echoed in the sermons of fire and brimstone preachers who turned faith into a fear economy. The Axeman simply modernized the ritual, and the media watched, they studied, and they learned. Fast forward to now. Today's media empires don't need axes or handwritten threats. They have headlines, push notifications, breaking news alerts calibrated to spike cortisol. Every school shooting, every virus outbreak, every celebrity scandal pushed with perfect timing, perfect repetition, perfect fear. Not to inform you, to reprogram you. You live inside a reality that runs on fear cycles because a scared population doesn't question. It obeys, it buys, it clicks, it stays small. And just like in 1919, your compliance is rewarded with survival. Keep scrolling, keep consuming, keep the jazz playing, and maybe he won't come. But understand this, the Axeman never left. He just changed his instrument from blade to broadcast, from killer to curator, and his music is still playing on every screen, every speaker, every algorithm. You've heard it, haven't you? The music that plays in the background of your favorite apps, the soft pulses, the calming tones, the binaural beats crafted to relax you. But relaxation is not the goal. Entrainment is. The science is ancient. When rhythms are repeated at the right frequency, your brain waves follow. What once required drumming shamans and tribal chants can now be packaged in sleek design and subtle loops. And beneath it all lies the same principle. Control the rhythm, and you control the mind. The Axeman's jazz wasn't random. Jazz, especially in the early 20th century, used syncopation, unexpected beats that throw the listener off balance. only to resolve into hypnotic patterns. This was more than style. It was psychological misdirection. He lured the conscious mind into distraction while the subconscious absorbed the command, submit, obey, survive. Today's equivalent isn't a saxophone, it's the notification chime, the TikTok audio, the political campaign jingle, rhythms engineered with military-grade research into human attention. Every beat is a leash, every melody a leash disguised as freedom. You think you're choosing what to listen to, but the songs are choosing you. They're tuning your emotions, timing your reactions, and scripting your internal dialogue. That Spotify playlist you play to focus. Test it. Turn it off. See how long your brain resists. You've been conditioned. And that is the deeper truth the Axeman revealed. He was a prototype, not just of a killer, but of a society that would one day use sound, media, and ritual to enslave without chains. And if you think this is a stretch, ask yourself, why are entire generations addicted to rhythms they don't understand? Why do soldiers march to drums? Why did ancient temples echo with chants? And why, in the most advanced age of history, do we still consume violence set to music, trauma wrapped in trending audio? Because rhythm bypasses logic. It whispers past the gatekeepers of the mind and rewrites the script beneath. In the heart of New Orleans, not far from where the Axeman once roamed, there stands a building, modest on the outside, abandoned, they say, but its foundations sink deep, not just into the earth, but into time. Before it was a warehouse, it was a convent. Before that, a holding site for troublesome slaves. And before that, something older. The floor plan hasn't changed. Neither has the placement of the windows or the altar-like structure in the center. Only the names have shifted. Locals avoid it. Not out of superstition, but instinct. The kind of instinct that trembles before memory, before recognition of something they were taught to forget. A journalist once tried to investigate. She went in with a recorder and a flashlight. The audio file recovered later was nothing but a low hum like a chant recorded underwater. She doesn't speak anymore, lives just outside Baton Rouge, paints symbols on her walls. One of them matches a carving found at the crime scenes of the Axeman. Not letters, not language, something pre-linguistic, a geometry of fear. You see, the architecture of horror isn't just physical, it's spatial. Frequencies, proportions, alignments that tap into parts of the mind untouched by reason. The Axeman didn't just kill, he opened doors, not metaphorical ones, real ones, between what you call now and what once ruled this land when no names were spoken. This building remains untouched by developers, not because it's worthless, but because it's owned, not by a person, not by a company, by something else. And when you see its blueprints, you begin to understand why murders in that district always follow a pattern, a spiral, always turning inward, always leading back to that place. And just like that, you begin to realize some crimes aren't solved, not because they can't be, but because solving them would reveal what civilization was built to hide. Every culture that survived long enough to write down its warnings spoke of the sound, not a scream, not a voice, a resonance, the kind that doesn't echo in the air, but in the bones. The Axeman's victims didn't always die from the blows. Some were found with eyes wide open, faces frozen in terror, no visible wounds, just internal rupture, like something had cracked their sanity before breaking their flesh. Forensic reports quietly filed away noted burst capillaries, blown eardrums, and in one case, a shattered sternum with no impact trauma. The lead examiner resigned, moved to Montana, never gave interviews. You see, there's a frequency that can dismantle a man without touching him. Military researchers flirted with it in the 60s. They called it non-lethal weaponry. The files are buried under Joint Task Force initiatives, but the core idea was ancient. It wasn't invented, it was rediscovered. And the Axeman, he played it, not on modern instruments, but through resonance chambers, wooden frames, floorboards, pipes. He turned homes into instruments. That's why he never brought his own weapon. The axe wasn't the cause, it was the signature. The ritual end, the real damage had already been done. And that jazz he spoke of in the letter, that wasn't a joke. That was the key. Syncopated rhythms interrupt resonance. They fragment the harmonic buildup. In essence, jazz, true chaotic jazz, is a weapon against whatever he was channeling. That's why he spared those homes, not out of mercy, out of necessity. The dissonance was a shield. The jazzmen weren't entertainers, they were defenders, unwitting perhaps, but crucial. And now you must ask yourself, how many frequencies are humming beneath your city? How many rooms are tuned like instruments of control? And how much of what you call silence is simply a pitch you were never meant to hear? In 1932, a classified memo circulated between 3 federal agencies. It referenced the New Orleans variable, citing anomalous psychological responses among citizens during the Axeman's reign: insomnia, hallucinations, auditory disturbances. The memo recommended monitoring urban populations for similar patterns under the guise of mental health studies. And so began the quiet infiltration of public health into mass control. Clinics popped up in low-income neighborhoods not to treat, but to track. Soundproof rooms, mirrored walls, voluntary diagnostics. You thought it was about welfare. It was reconnaissance. By 1948, the technology had advanced. They no longer needed the axe. They could induce dread through building design, street layout, even lighting frequency. Psychological manipulation wasn't a possibility, it was a blueprint. Cities became circuits. The Axeman was merely the prototype, chaos delivered through a human form but empowered by architecture and resonance. Why do you think certain cities feel heavy? Why some buildings seem to suffocate even if they're new? They're tuned, calibrated, calming the herd through angles, frequencies, patterns only a few can hear. That's why you feel restless. That's why sleep feels lighter. You've been vibrating to a design not your own. The Axeman may be gone, but the code he played lives on, echoed in shopping malls, subway tunnels, stadiums. And the more you deny the sound, the deeper it carves into your thoughts. In 1951, a low-frequency experiment codenamed HIM Protocol was conducted beneath a psychiatric hospital in Louisiana. It targeted impulse control, rage suppression, and emotional rewiring, all through inaudible tones broadcast during patient sleep cycles. The core frequency, 470 Hz, eerily close to what musicians used to ward off the Axeman decades earlier. Coincidence doesn't stretch that far. This was not the tension. Therapy. This was orchestration. Records of the experiment were sealed, but brief slips in redacted documents revealed side effects: dream bleeding, identity fragmentation, and, in one subject, complete linguistic reset. He awoke unable to speak English, only strange Latin verses. When interrogated, he repeated the phrase, "Non tangere cordas demonis," do not touch the demon strings. But by then it was too late. The protocol was refined and rolled out in unmarked vans, mobile research labs disguised as public health outreach. Frequencies were tested on whole neighborhoods. You remember those nights, the ones where sleep felt thick and your dreams weren't yours. That wasn't stress, that was calibration. And those vans, you still see them, white, windowless, parked just long enough to tune the block. Most just walk by, but if you ever stood close you felt it, like your spine trying to hum a note it never learned. This is not conspiracy, it's composition. You were always part of someone else's symphony. They say the Axeman vanished in 1919, but they never tell you what surfaced in his place, because when one instrument is silenced, another begins to play. After the final letter, a series of disappearances began, not just of people, but of paper, of evidence, of names from registries. The police clerks who filed the Axeman case, dead within 5 years. 2 of them committed suicide. 1 was found with a note carved into his back. The song never ended. In the years that followed, a peculiar trend emerged. Those who spoke too loudly about the Axeman's mythology would suffer inexplicable neurological breakdowns. One local professor, obsessed with decoding the jazz night letter, began speaking in rhythmic pulses and syncopated nonsense before collapsing mid-lecture. Another, a jazz musician who claimed to know the true key of the killer's melody, disappeared after a midnight set at a club on St. Charles Avenue. His trumpet was found on stage, still vibrating, his seat empty, his drink untouched, his bones never recovered. It was as if playing the melody summoned something still waiting. Do you see it now? The Axeman was not a man. He was a threshold, a signal, a test pattern hidden in blood and melody. You're not watching a story about a serial killer. You're witnessing the anatomy of control disguised as chaos. They don't need a monster in the shadows anymore. They built the song into your walls, into your phones, into your sleep. They made you dance without moving. And if you're hearing this, you're already humming along. There's a reason the Jazz Night letter still circulates in occult forums, dissected like scripture. Every punctuation mark, every turn of phrase. But what most never see is the cipher hidden in cadence, the pulse of manipulation coded in style, not substance. The Axeman's letter wasn't just a threat, it was an invocation, a ritual broadcast to be disguised as madness. And the city played along. That night, as jazz blared from every window, the sound wasn't just music, it was alignment, a mass entrainment of thought, will, identity. What masqueraded as survival was, in truth, surrender. The rhythm bent their minds, syncopated their sense of safety, rewrote their memory of fear into a celebration of noise. That was the moment New Orleans became a city haunted not by ghosts, but by consent. That was the moment obedience became joy. And it never stopped. The model worked. The machine learned. If you can terrify them, you can lead them. If you can entertain them, you can erase them. The Axeman's cleaver was crude but effective. Now they use sharper tools, softer sounds, brighter screens, and they let you dance all the way to your own erasure. And still you ask, why jazz? Because jazz, in its roots, is chaos mastered, pain beautified, trauma stylized until the scream becomes harmony. They hijacked a sacred expression and bent it into a cage. Now imagine what else they've turned against you. They didn't just kill with an axe. They killed with suggestion, with expectation, with the eerie silence that followed every headline and the psychological imprint etched into every home that played music that night. You must understand, this was never about the murder. It was about the message. A test. How easily would the people obey a phantom's demand? The results were devastating. Absolute compliance, without evidence, without logic, without resistance. And here's what they learned. Fear rewires the human mind faster than reason ever could. But this wasn't isolated to New Orleans. After the Jazz Night, similar patterns emerged, across cities, across decades. Copycat phenomena? No. Echoes, repetitions of a dark ritual cloaked in urban legend. The true lesson was never in the bloodshed. It was in the obedience that followed. A mass rehearsal for future control. Just change the threat. Replace the axe with scarcity, the jazz with headlines, the phantom with policy. And you will see it again, over and over. Different faces, same template. That's how deep this goes. That's how old the system is. The Axeman was not a man. The Axeman was a function, a role, a signal that the next phase of psychological warfare had begun. And you? You were the experiment. He wrote to the newspapers not as a madman, but as a herald. And yet they published it. They amplified his voice, made him real, not just to New Orleans but to the American subconscious. The media did not question the absurdity of his promise. They obeyed it. And the people, they turned their radios on, filled the streets with jazz, as if salvation had been bartered with melody. This was not news. This was programming, a ritual broadcast, a collective performance dictated by an invisible force. No suspect, no motive, just a demand from the shadows and complete submission in return. Ask yourself, who benefits from this choreography of terror? The answer is not in the acts, but in the aftermath. The fear turned people inward, into their homes, into their radios. The illusion of safety became more precious than truth. This is how society is softened, how the mind is slowly prepared for deeper forms of compliance. The Axeman's letter was not just a warning, it was a mirror, and what it reflected was a people already trained to obey an authority they couldn't see, already broken by the idea that someone, somewhere, was watching, deciding, and could strike at any moment. This is where control becomes sacred, when mystery becomes more powerful than proof. when silence speaks louder than screams. There was no trial, no arrest, no face to punish. The Axeman vanished like smoke, but the ritual remained. People spoke of him in whispers, passing down fear like a family heirloom. But that's the secret. He didn't need to keep killing. The true crime was already committed. Mass psychological fracture. Once the soul of a city is cracked, it no longer needs blood to stay afraid. The institutions fed off that fear, churches offering sermons on evil, newspapers selling headlines soaked in anxiety, and officials pushing stricter curfews, new patrols, tighter control. Safety became a product. Authority became gospel. And the Axeman, a phantom dividend paid out to every system that profits when people stop thinking for themselves. Do you understand now? This wasn't just a string of murders. This was a template, a prototype for how to hijack a population without bullets or ballots. You strike the psyche, not the body. You make obedience feel like survival. And if done correctly, the people will thank their captors. They'll beg for stronger locks, louder laws, harsher silence. The Axeman didn't just kill people. He killed certainty, and from that death, control grew. There is a reason the Axeman was never caught. A reason why evidence dissolved, trails went cold, and suspects conveniently disappeared. Because catching him was never the objective. He was never meant to be caged. He was meant to be remembered. An archetype, not a fugitive. A ghost story seeded into the American psyche, whispered at night, echoing in every locked door and sleepless stare. His absence became his power. No trial, no confession, no justice, just myth. And myths are harder to kill than men. Ask yourself, who benefits from terror without resolution? Who gains when fear becomes folklore? The institutions that preach protection yet feed on uncertainty. The very systems that promised order used his legacy to sharpen their claws. Police patrols increased. Community trust declined. Surveillance grew. And all the while, the public begged for more control, more oversight, more safety. The Axeman didn't vanish. He was absorbed, transformed from flesh into symbol. And in America, symbols become doctrine. You were never meant to remember the faces of his victims. That's the trick. Erase the humanity. Elevate the fear. History forgets names but clings to shadows, and the Axeman was engineered to be exactly that. A permanent silhouette carved into cultural memory. Every retelling strips away fact and reinforces the myth. The deeper horror isn't what he did, but what was done with him. Entire communities manipulated, instincts rewired, normalcy shattered, all under the guise of a phantom. And while you were watching the headlines, the real architects went unnoticed. Not killers with blades, but men with paper, ink, and power. The kind who author fear not with axes, but with silence and strategy. This wasn't a story of one man, it was a rehearsal. A test. How far can terror go before truth is no longer necessary? You've already answered that without knowing. You made it, but ye, or not the same man who started. Something in you shifted. Subtle, irreversible. The pieces you've collected weren't just about the Axeman. They were keys. Keys to patterns that repeat silently, invisibly, because that's where real control thrives. In the subconscious, in what you're conditioned to ignore. The Axeman was a mirror, not of evil, but of engineered fear, of rituals played in cities that dance to music they don't hear. You now carry knowledge that resists forgetting, that sharpens your awareness like the edge of his weapon. They don't fear monsters. They fear men who recognize the machinery behind the myth, men who no longer play along. And if you felt that burn behind your eyes, that tightening in your chest as the lies peeled back, then type it now, twice. The music was never for him. In the comments, seal it, brand it into the code. Because now you know, not all crimes end with arrests. Some end with obedience. And others? They're still happening, just quieter. Welcome to the awakening.